I still remember the exact second Adrian Blake stepped through my front door, because something inside me shifted before he even spoke. It wasn't just his presence, it was the way the air seemed to tighten, like the room itself was holding its breath. At the time, I told myself it was nothing more than nerves. But looking back now, I know that was the moment everything began to unravel. My name is Ethan Cole, and I've always been the kind of person who avoids complications. I prefer quiet routines, predictable days, and relationships that don't demand too much explanation. That's probably why I stayed with Liam Carter for as long as I did. We met in college, and at first, he felt like certainty, someone confident enough to fill the spaces I left unspoken. But over time, that certainty turned into something else. Liam had a way of making me feel like I was always just slightly out of reach, like I had to earn his attention. He'd go hours without replying to my messages, then brush it off with a vague excuse. When we were together, he was distant, distracted, his mind always somewhere else. I told myself it was stress, that relationships weren't supposed to be easy all the time. But deep down, I knew I was holding on to something that was already slipping through my fingers. That week, things felt especially off. Liam had cancelled plans twice, and when I called him, his voice carried an impatience that made me hesitate before speaking. It wasn't anger exactly, it was indifference, which somehow hurt more. After we hung up, I sat alone in my apartment, staring at my phone, wondering when I had become someone who waited. That's when my uncle, Raymond Cole, called. Uncle Raymond had always been practical, direct, the kind of man who didn't waste words. He told me a friend of his, Adrian Blake, would be in town for a few days and needed a place to stay. It wasn't really a request, it was more like an assumption that I'd agree. And I did. I told myself it would be good to have some company, something to distract me from the quiet that had started to feel suffocating. I didn't think much about it after that. Just another temporary arrangement, another person passing through my life without leaving much behind. If anything, I was more focused on whether Liam would finally make time to see me that weekend. The night Adrian arrived, the sky was overcast, the kind of dull gray that made everything feel heavier than usual. I had just finished tidying up the living room when the doorbell rang. For a second, I stood still, an inexplicable tension settling in my chest. Then I shook it off and walked to the door. When I opened it, Adrian Blake was standing there, his expression calm, almost unreadable. He wasn't what I expected. There was nothing overly striking about him at first glance, but the longer I looked, the harder it was to look away. His posture was relaxed, his gaze steady, as if he was quietly taking everything in. When his eyes met mine, there was a flicker of something, recognition, maybe, though we had never met before. Ethan, he said, his voice low and even, like he already knew the rhythm of my name. I nodded, suddenly aware of how small the doorway felt, how close we were standing. Adrian. Come in. He stepped inside without hesitation, his movements unhurried, deliberate. As he passed me, I caught a faint scent of something clean and subtle, and for reasons I couldn't explain, it made me more aware of my own breathing. Nice place, he said, glancing around the apartment. His tone was casual, but there was a precision in the way he observed things, as if nothing escaped his notice. Thanks. It's nothing special, I replied, closing the door behind him. He turned slightly, his gaze returning to me. It suits you. The comment was simple, but it lingered longer than it should have. I wasn't used to being seen that way, not by Liam, not by anyone. For a moment, I didn't know how to respond, so I just nodded and gestured toward the guest room. I've set everything up for you, I said. Let me know if you need anything. Adrian followed me down the short hallway, his presence quiet but unmistakable. When we reached the room, he paused at the doorway, looking inside before setting his bag down. This is perfect, he said. Then, after a brief silence, he added, you didn't have to go through so much trouble. It wasn't trouble, I said quickly. It's just easier when things are in order. He studied me for a second longer than felt comfortable, as if he was trying to understand something beneath the surface. Then he gave a small nod. I can see that. We stood there in an awkward quiet, the kind that usually made me retreat, fill the space with unnecessary words. But this time, I didn't. Something about Adrian made silence feel less like a void and more like a question waiting to be answered. Eventually, I stepped back. "I'll let you settle in." "Ethan," he said before I could turn away. That I looked at him, my hand still resting lightly on the doorframe. "Thank you," he said, his tone softer now, almost thoughtful. "Not just for the room." I frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" For a moment, he didn't answer. His gaze held mine, steady and searching, as if he was deciding how much to say. "Nothing," he said finally. "Just, thank you." I nodded, though the response didn't quite sit right with me, and stepped out into the hallway. As I walked back to the living room, I could feel his presence lingering behind me. Even with the door closed, that I tried to distract myself, picking up my phone and scrolling through messages. There was still nothing from Liam. No explanation, no apology, just silence. I stared at the empty screen, a familiar frustration building in my chest. From down the hall, I heard the faint sound of movement, the quiet shift of someone settling into a space that wasn't theirs. It should have felt ordinary, but it didn't. There was something about Adrian that made everything feel slightly off balance, like a routine I could no longer fully trust. That I set my phone down and leaned back against the couch, exhaling slowly. Maybe this was a good thing, I told myself. A distraction. A temporary change, but even as I tried to convince myself of that, a thought lingered at the edge of my mind, uninvited and impossible to ignore. That it wasn't just that Adrian Blake had walked into my apartment that night. That it was the way he looked at me, like he already knew something I hadn't said, and for the first time in a long while, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just let someone into my life who wasn't there by coincidence. The watch did not belong in Malik Okoye's house, and the longer I looked at it, the harder it became to convince myself otherwise. Daniel Reeves never took it off. I had seen him wear it through late nights, long drives, and quiet conversations that once felt unbreakable. It wasn't just an accessory, it was a constant, a small detail that had become inseparable from him. And now it was here, resting on a table in a house filled with silence and unanswered questions. That I forced myself to look away, but the thought had already rooted itself too deeply to ignore. "That's a nice watch," I said carefully, keeping my voice steady. "Is it yours?" Malik's eyes shifted toward it for the briefest moment before returning to me. That single glance was enough to confirm what he didn't say. "No," he replied. The simplicity of his answer made it heavier, not lighter. He didn't elaborate, didn't offer an explanation or a name. He just let the silence stretch between us again, as if daring me to fill it. That I leaned back slightly, studying him in a way I hadn't allowed myself to before. "Then whose is it?" This time, Malik didn't look at the watch. He kept his gaze fixed on me, his expression unreadable, but there was tension beneath it now, something coiled and waiting. "Does it matter?" he asked. "It might," I said. Another pause followed, thicker than the last. I could feel the shift in the room, subtle but undeniable. Whatever distance had existed between us before was gone now, replaced by something sharper, more direct. Malik exhaled slowly, his composure tightening again as if he were pulling himself back into place. "You should be careful, Ethan," he said quietly. "Some questions don't lead anywhere good." I let out a faint, humorless breath. I think I'm already past that point. For a moment, it seemed like he might shut the conversation down entirely. His jaw tensed, his eyes flickering with something I couldn't fully read, conflict, maybe, or reluctance. But then, just as quickly, something shifted. "You know him," Malik said. That it wasn't a question. That my chest tightened. "Daniel?" Malik nodded once, his gaze never leaving mine. "He talked about you." The words landed harder than I expected. "When?" A faint, almost bitter smile touched Malik's lips, though it didn't reach his eyes. "More than you'd probably like." I felt something twist inside me, a mix of confusion and something uncomfortably close to betrayal. "I don't understand," I admitted. Malik leaned back, his posture less guarded now, but not more relaxed. If anything, He looked like a man who had decided there was no point in holding anything back anymore. "No," he said, almost to himself. "I don't think you do." The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was heavy with everything he wasn't saying. I could feel it pressing in on me, demanding to be acknowledged. "Then explain it," I said, more firmly this time. For a long moment, Malik didn't respond. His gaze drifted briefly toward the watch before returning to me, as if weighing something internal, something unresolved. "Daniel wasn't just your friend," he said finally. The statement felt incomplete, like the first piece of something much larger. "What does that mean?" I asked, though a part of me already sensed where this was going. Malik's expression hardened slightly, not out of anger, but out of certainty. "It means," he said, his voice steady but lower now, "that you didn't know him as well as you thought you did." A quiet tension filled the space between us, and I felt my pulse begin to quicken, each beat echoing louder than the last. "You're saying he was lying to me?" I pressed. "I'm saying," Malik replied, choosing his words carefully, "that he was living a life you weren't part of." The word settled heavily in my mind, refusing to make sense in any way that felt rational. Daniel had been distant lately, yes, but distance wasn't betrayal. It wasn't secrecy. It wasn't this. "What kind of life?" I asked, my voice quieter now. Malik held my gaze, and for the first time, there was no hesitation in him. "One where he came here," he said. "Not as a visitor. Not as a stranger." The implication hit before the full meaning did, sharp and disorienting. "You're saying—" "I'm saying he wasn't just connected to this house," Malik interrupted, his tone firm. "He was part of it." The room seemed to close in around me, every detail suddenly sharper, more significant. The phone on the table. The misplaced photograph. The tension in Malik's voice whenever Ava's name came up. "And Ava?" I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop. At the mention of her name, something shifted in Malik again. This time, it was unmistakable. "She knew," he said. The words were quiet, but they carried more weight than anything else he had said so far. "Knew what?" I asked, though I was no longer sure I wanted the answer. Malik's gaze dropped briefly, his composure faltering in a way it hadn't before. When he spoke again, his voice was steadier, but there was something strained beneath it. "She knew that our marriage wasn't what it appeared to be," he said. "And she knew about Daniel." A slow, sinking realization began to take hold, each piece falling into place with a clarity that felt almost cruel. "You and Daniel." I couldn't finish the sentence. "Malik did it for me, yes." The confirmation was simple, but it carried the weight of everything that had been hidden until now. I felt my thoughts scatter, struggling to process the reality of what he was telling me. "How long?" I asked. "Long enough," Malik replied. The answer didn't give me anything concrete, but it didn't need to. The truth was already clear enough that I ran a hand through my hair, trying to steady myself. "And Ava just accepted it?" Malik let out a quiet breath, his gaze distant now. "She didn't have a choice," he said. "Not really." The words lingered, unsettling in their implication. "What does that mean?" I pressed, but Malik didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked at me with something that felt almost like pity. "It means," he said slowly, "that some people learn to live with things they were never meant to understand." A chill ran through me, not because of what he said, but because of how easily he said it. "And Daniel?" I asked after a moment. "Where is he now?" At that, Malik's expression changed again, something darker slipping through the cracks of his composure. "He stopped coming," he said. "When?" Malik's gaze held mine, steady and unyielding. "Before Ava died." The words settled heavily between us, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. I glanced back at the watch, my chest tightening once more as the weight of everything pressed in. Daniel had been here, that he had been part of this, and then, suddenly, he was gone. I looked back at Malik, a new question forming, sharper than the rest. "What happened?" I asked quietly, "before she died?" Malik didn't answer, but this time, his silence felt like the beginning of something far more dangerous than the truth.